Yeah. Well, or a good angle.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
I don't know, it could be
but
fun.
why did you chop them all up?
Yeah.
Well, good to see you.
Good to see you.
How's it going?
Good.
How's the work at the firm going?
Good. Always busy.
Anything crazy happening lately? What's crazy?
I don't know. Probably, but I'm still getting back into the swing because I was out on vacation.
Oh, very nice.
Yes.
I feel like this is the time of year that people slip away.
Yeah.
The spring break.
I was gonna say
moment.
yes. Usually because the kid has a break from school, and you're like, great.
That's
I'm
the
gonna
thing.
make sure we do something.
Well, I was just talking with Megan Sherry about school and parents and all of that, but I wanted to talk about something different with you.
We're gonna hard pivot.
Yeah, hard pivot, but maybe somehow related to parents in school. But O.J. Simpson died recently.
I did see that.
And I think O.J. has come up on our conversations a couple times because it's just like for someone like me that was like around in the 90s, like that was the entryway into learning about a lot of how courtrooms work, weirdly enough. Like, it's kind of funny to think like Johnny Cochran and all that was the entryway into... Yeah. But still, I mean, it's a big moment. But what I wanted to talk with you about is sort of like, I don't know, for me, the OJ story has so many angles. Not for me, for everyone. But like one of them is just the raw story of like a stalker ex-husband. And I'm wondering like what's the legal world like when it comes to stalkers and exes and that sort of like toxic ex, because I don't know, the OJ story is a horrifying one when you realize the details of it.
Yeah.
It's like of a woman who like had a guy that was like obsessed with her forever and like ultimately like owned her. And I'm wondering like where have you encountered that in your work in family law? Because it seems like it's a common phenomenon. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, common, it feels like it's common. I don't know how common it really is. But again, I think a lot of what we see are the more contentious or messy scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I've gone to a lot of different seminars where they talk about the different aspects of abuse or the ability now to, you can stalk somebody a lot of different ways with the technology that's available now.
Right.
I mean, they can download, it gets scary. Like they can download an app on your phone that you won't even know is there, and it will track everything you're doing.
Yikes.
Yeah. I was like, those seminars are the ones that scare me when I walk out. I'm like, oh my God.
Wait, so like stuff they're discussing at conferences and seminars of like, this is the world that we're looking at now?
Yeah, it's things you have to consider and think about, because what happens sometimes is somebody will come to you with a story and it sounds so just like it's from a movie.
Yes.
That it can be hard as a person to believe. And so that makes it hard for a judge to believe. And if you are not kind of aware of the different ways that people can monitor or control people from afar or track them, then you can't explain that to somebody else. And you definitely can't then give advice to your clients to like, hey, you need to turn off like your location service like option on all of these different apps. And you should search, because, if somebody's downloaded something from like the dark web onto your phone, you can still search for it and it'll come up, but it won't show up on your home screen. Or make sure you've changed the password to the Nest thermostat.
You are horrifying me with all of this.
This is what I know. It's like it gets dark real fast. Like there are people who, so the irony is the term gaslighting came from the I don't remember if they were married, but the guy used to turn down the gas lamps in the home. And the wife was like, why is it so dark in here? He's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh my God.
Okay. But now people do that with like your Nest thermostat. Like all of a sudden it'll be at 80 degrees and you're like, why is it so hot in here? And
you're like,
I don't know. You have no ability to control it.
I had no idea that was the origin of the term gaslighting. Because it's that term is everywhere now. Yes. And it's such a particular psychological phenomenon it's describing. For people that don't know, it's exactly what you just said. It's kind of sort of like, I don't know, making someone believe, like make someone doubt their own sanity. I feel like it's often like you're being a wife suspects her husband of cheating and confronts him about it, and he's like,
You're being crazy.
I've been thinking you've been out of your mind for a while here. Yes, that sort of thing. And gaslighting can be very sophisticated, it sounds like.
Yes. There's so many different ways to accomplish it now.
Ugh.
And the other problem with when the terms become very popular is a lot of people then just sort of like roll their eyes and think like, oh, okay, you're saying that because you read an article online and that's what you think is happening. And a lot of times that is what's happening.
When my wife tells me she wants that we actually should go to this restaurant, I'm like, you're gaslighting me right now. Like, right. That's what's happening. Yes. You're gaslighting me. Yeah, I understand. It becomes like washed out, the meaning of it.
Yeah, and a lot of those psychological terms now are so commonly used that they lose a lot of the original intention of it, which those things still exist.
Right. So, I mean, we were just talking about autism, and autism is a word that became like a very wide umbrella, and it's a wider umbrella like diagnostically too. But it also feels like a lot of people are jumping on to an autistic sort of idea. Yeah. And there are a lot of words like that. It's interesting. So yeah, how does that play out then in like restraining orders and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably where we more commonly see like the stalker X or the continuing to make attempts to control X, because a lot of these abusive situations are not as clear cut as the OJ Nicole Brown,
right,
where you have the photos of these horrifying bruises and injuries that is clear cut. A lot of it is more subversive abuse where they cut you off from your family and they have all the financial control. And the way that they've talked to you over the years then has shifted your perception of how things should go. So then what triggers you seems innocuous to a lot of people, but because you know the intent behind that particular phrase or sentence, because of how it's been used and weaponized in the past, and that makes it in like a court setting, those types of behaviors make it a lot harder because that coercive control is not as clean to explain. And sometimes you're looking at the text messages, you're like, okay, but all he said was, this.
Yeah.
But when you hear the backstory of how he's used that, you're like, oh, yeah, like now I get why that would be so upsetting and, emotionally scarring based on the history.
Crazy.
So, yeah.
It's like, I mean, we all know this, that like a marriage develops its own world in a way, its own ecosystem of communication and pathologies and everything else.
Yes. My husband and I almost exclusively speak to each other through like movie and TV quotes. Like we can go an entire conversation and that's all we've used.
Yeah. You know what? It's so funny because the only other time I had a relationship like that before I was having romantic relationships, I guess, was like with like friends that like I had my best friend in school and we had our little private language.
Yes.
Of like totally movie references. It's kind of, I'd never thought about that as a legal thing before, though. That, like, in order to figure out if, like, abuse is going on, we have to sort of get into how does this couple actually relate to each other? Yeah. Which is so different for everybody.
Yes. Yeah, really. that makes it harder to show and explain. And, a lot of times the clients that I'm talking to don't even understand it that way. Like there will be things that they say and like my spidey sense goes off and you're just like, I'm going to have some follow-up questions on that probably on another day because this starts to sound like things are going on here and we're going to need to be careful about what's on your phone and changing your passwords and because there are things now that are concerning. So
it's funny that you said spidey sense because I was thinking it is a sort of like intuitive thing. It gets back to the therapist element, which you're not. You're not a therapist. And yet, in order to get at the legal meat of what you're doing here, it seems like you do have to have a spidey sense, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that ends up coming just from experience on other cases. I mean, I remember when I first started here, I was in a consult with Ron, and we were 10 minutes into talking to this person, and all of a sudden Ron started asking a series of questions where I knew he was screening to see if there was abuse. And I was like, how did you, like when we got done, I was like, how did you even pick up on that? Like we were 10 minutes in talking to this person, and he described some of the behaviors that he had noticed. And I was like, oh.
Do you remember what they were?
I don't, because it'll probably meld with everything
cases,
else.
yeah.
But just like a lot of times it's the way they respond to things, or their inability to put things in a straight timeline. A lot of times will show that there's some level of trauma that the brain has experienced. And so you're just, kind of on alert for it.
It's funny because I was thinking of coming into this conversation with you about like OJ and, stalker exes and stuff like that. It's such a dramatic story and it's such a violent story, but it sounds like what you're describing is like actually figuring out what is abuse is a much more subtle process.
It is. Yeah. The easy ones are like the clear cut. There are bruises.
Physical abuse. Yeah.
There are injuries. The guy is parked outside the house. That is a lot easier to put in front of a court and identify as that stalker situation. And it's funny because I just had to, I'm going to get the percentage wrong, but I just looked at the percentages for like stalker based on gender in an intimate partner relationship. And so, because you always see like on most of the movies and stuff, it's like the crazy ex-girlfriend who's stalking you.
Oh, it's funny. Yeah. Because I was thinking in reality, isn't it mostly men stalking women?
It is mostly men. Yeah. Like by a huge margin. I want to say it's like 90% of the stalker behavior is men versus the women. But like that perception in the media a lot of times shifts to like, oh God, she's so crazy.
Yeah.
And she's following him around, and she, took a baseball bat to his windshield. And that's...
I think there was a TV show called like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend or something like that a few years ago. And people were upset about this actual thing. They're like, wait a second. But in reality, it's mostly like dudes stalking women and often like ending up killing them. So many murders happen that way, right? And it's sort of like that trope of the crazy ex-girlfriend is doesn't seem like, it seems like it's sort of like a wishful thinking almost in some ways.
Right.
Like that's what the
it's
problem
good TV. It's a good, country
Not
song
that such
every once
things
in a while.
don't exist, right? Oh my God. So the subtle part of it is interesting to me. So like, how do you, like, what I guess I'm thinking like when it's so subtle and you got to convince someone that this subtle thing that's happening is abuse. Like what is abuse? Like what is beyond the broad stuff that we all know when we see bruises?
Right.
Like what is abuse? Like what can you go argue?
It's a pretty broad definition right now in the family code. So it is defined basically as anything physically, psychologically, or emotionally harming to you, including disturbing your peace.
Wow.
So that can mean a whole lot of different things. They have added in there now the actual wording coercive control, because that is where a lot of the energy has been spent lately, is understanding how that works and being able to have a court understand how that works, because that is the harder one really to prove. But it's a pretty expansive definition. So there's a lot of things that can fall into that. And then the court has to decide, usually on a temporary basis. Most things they're going to sign off on a temporary restraining order just to like make sure that everything is okay. But after you go through a hearing, like the court is trying to balance out, was this like a one-off incident? Is this a history and pattern of behavior? Is this likely to continue?
At what point is it criminal? I mean, are these...
A lot of times it ends up being criminal too. I mean, the problem with that is you have police officers who are trying to make a determination about what's happened for something that they didn't see.
Yeah.
A lot of times. And many victims are so reactive that they will be the ones arrested because they seem the most out of control and like potentially the person who initiated it, even if that's not the reality of the case.
Yeah.
So it's difficult for the officers and the DA to really know in those situations either. So there are a lot of times where we're simultaneously dealing with the restraining order portion and the criminal component of it until that criminal component has been resolved, however that gets resolved. Sometimes it's they don't file. Sometimes it's by some sort of deal. And sometimes we have to wait kind of all the way through whatever happens with that case.
Wow.
So
what about flushing the toilet while your partner is in the shower?
now that is absolutely
that's it in
when the scalding hot water hits.
There's a statute there somewhere. Wow, God, I'd never really considered how much the sort of the particular patterns of a relationship need to be investigated.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And even when you're in those consultations or interviews with the client and your spidey sense goes off, you know, it doesn't mean that they're ready to address that. And sometimes they don't want to, because there are all the other considerations of going through the family law process that they have to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most of the time you're still going to have to co-parent with that person if you have kids together. And so considering they have to consider their own level of safety and what they're able to deal with in some of those. So.
Right. I mean, I don't even know how you do such a thing.
And right. Everybody has a different thought process on it based on their experience. So sitting on the outside and saying like, what I see is really clear cut. This doesn't mean that that's the route that you are going to end up going.
Well, it's also like, I mean, you know, you talk about this sort of like syndrome of being in a relationship like that. It seems like the loyalty to that other person is often so strong that it's going to overcome all these lawyers who are there, like trying to be like, you should be making these claims. Because it seems like, I mean, it's a very common phenomenon, right? That people don't want to rat out on their partner that for abuse.
Yes, I've had people who are like, I don't want them to lose their job because of this.
Uh-huh.
I don't want that to be in a public record anywhere.
Right.
And sometimes it's because I think we talked about this before, like I don't want my kid to be able to access that at some point in the future and know that that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the time people think that the kids don't know that stuff is going on.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't know everything that's going on, but they usually know some of the stuff that's going on unless they're real small.
What about people that don't have kids together, that are just sort of relationships that fell apart? Because one of the things that it's a case that has bothered me, honestly, for years. I don't know if you've seen this case at all. It became well known in the press because the woman who was killed, she was murdered by her ex-boyfriend down in L.A. She was dating Drew Carey. Do you know this case at all? She was like, I forget her name. I'll bring it up. I think her name is Amy. She was a like relationship therapist. She was like an influencer. Here it is. Amy Harwick.
Okay.
And she was murdered on Valentine's Day in 2020. She talked about on her podcast for like a couple years that there was a guy that was an ex that was stalking her, and he eventually killed her. And the sort of like rage of that, to me, of like knowing that the guy is bothering you for fucking years, you're talking about it on a podcast, and yet there was nothing that could be done about this person. And it's very close to the OJ case, because I think Nicole Brown felt this way as well.
Right.
Which is like, I have a cancer, basically. Like, there's a guy that just will not let it go. And like, to me, like I want to like write a movie or a screenplay. I think they already are there. Yeah. Of like this, like what are your options in such a situation? Because that is a nightmare to me.
Yes.
And one that I haven't experienced. I don't want anyone obsessed with me on that level.
No.
I don't think anyone does. But I mean, that story really bothered me, in part because she was so public about like this problem. She's like a feminist influencer who's talking about the issue, and then she could not escape like being murdered by the dude. And I don't know. It's very upsetting.
Right. Well, and it is, I can't call it a failing of the legal system, but like the legal system's not necessarily set up for the hypothetical, but what if
Right.
guy does this. So
Right.
like, I don't know. I'm assuming she had some sort of restraining order.
Yes.
In
Oh
place.
yeah. Multiple restraining
I was
orders.
like, I can't imagine if she's talking about it on a podcast that she probably didn't. But at the end of the day, that is just a piece of paper.
Right.
And so I have clients who we have restraining orders for them. The other side violates the restraining orders and they still are unwilling to call the police because it takes more than just like one violation for the police to really like move it forward to process, because it's a violation of the restraining order. It's a misdemeanor. Sometimes, depending on what it is, it could be potentially a felony. I think that would be pretty substantial, but
Yeah.
there's, I think, some discretion there. So, but the DA needs a pattern really of these violations being called in so that then they can charge them. And then eventually that results in jail time, depending on the severity or how many times it's been violated. And all of that is frustrating when you're sitting there like, this guy is sitting outside my house right now.
Oh,
like,
shit.
I cannot leave my house. And I have called the cops and they have told him to move, but like, he can come at any time. He doesn't seem to care. But it is building like that foundation to ultimately have that person put in jail because they are actually violating the restraining order. And, you know, again, it's not going to be for long periods of time. You can't just like lock them up because you think maybe this person might kill you.
And yet
That's
there
not
are
how the
so
law
many
works. I
stories
know.
that- I mean, it's people that are like, this guy's going to kill me. This guy. I mean, literally, Nicole Brown was like, this guy's going to kill me. This guy's going to kill me. I think she left pictures in the safety deposit box.
Yeah.
That were basically like, if I ever end up dead, this is the guy that did it.
Yeah.
You know, it's, and like that part of it is so just insane to me because I put myself in that situation. It's like, I'm not going to let myself be killed here.
Right.
And yet, whatever you do would be extra legal. You know what I mean? Like, whatever you did to be like, I'm going to set a bear trap and get this guy.
I mean, if it's in your house, I think that's
Yeah, right. No, that's illegal. No, not for, lethal force for just defensive property. That's what I learned.
okay. But if you're in
You
the
can't
house,
set up a shotgun in your barn
Yeah.
to shoot whoever goes in your barn.
If you were in the barn, though,
If you're in the
maybe.
barn,
Yeah.
yeah.
that would be
Sleeping?
somewhere under the castle doctrine,
Like I'm
right?
gonna, so okay, I'll just sleep with a bunch of shotguns aimed out from my bed.
Right.
Like this is part of the movie.
Yeah.
No,
It's terrifying. I mean, I know we're laughing, but it is absolutely terrifying to think about that scenario because that is all of our worst nightmares.
It's
having
extreme,
no
but it's also like
control.
what? Yeah, what do you do? I mean, it makes me think of like a Terminator that just like keeps coming. You know, you realize this person is unstoppable, and like that's part of the restraining order frustration. It's sort of like, I guess for a lot of people, maybe the restraining order is enough of a
Yes.
deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think we're talking about people who just
Psychos. We're talking about psychos.
are not concerned about what is
It's a technical term.
what is happening with a court order or anything else. They're not worried about being arrested. You know, they're not worried about any of those things. They're either so in the throes of some mental health issue that they can't see through that, or so I do think that that's the exception, not the rule. I think most of the time the restraining order is like the warning shot that gets people to back off.
Right.
So,
Right.
but yeah, there are the ones who do not heed the warning shot.
Mental health services for stalkers.
Right.
Because
Well,
like
yes,
ultimately
'cause
that isn't what we're talking about. Like when I think about
That level of obsession is not healthy.
I mean, I was gonna say normal, but I was like maybe it is normal. But no, like that. It's clear that everyone recognizes. I think that when there's a killing that happens like this, that or a stalking situation that becomes violent, it's like the person is tweaked in some way. Like
Right.
there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, well, addressing that would be, I guess, the smart
Yeah,
way.
but I mean, the problem with that is that usually mental health help isn't going to work unless the person who's receiving it is in a position to receive it, like is acknowledging that this is a problem and is willing to work through it. I mean, otherwise that's not going to actually help.
It might just be assholes too, right? It might.
Some of them are just assholes.
Like
yes.
it might not be like a mental deficiency or an actual like I don't know chemical imbalance. There's just like this person has.
Some of them are controlling assholes, and then if you take away what they perceive to be the control, they lash out.
Is it? I mean, is it a culture of masculinity too? Like I think that there seems like that part of it. I don't know. There's like people that just can't lose. I mean, I'm thinking about Trump, like sort of like the guy that can't lose. You know, I can't admit it that I lost, and that feels like a very like male quality in some ways. Although probably see it in women as well. But I don't know. I'm just trying to like locate the root source of what this phenomenon is, because it seems like as much as we talk about the extreme stalker that like does a murder or something, that extreme stalker's mindset is connected to a larger sort of attitude of control and domination and that sort of thing.
Well, you can trace some of that back well before OJ, but OJ ultimately got away with it.
Right.
So, because he allegedly killed her.
Right.
He wasn't convicted.
That's right. He was
and
acquitted
so,
by a jury of his peers.
Right. And so some of that, I think, is that masculine societal like mindset of, I mean, you have this famous football player who, seems like a nice enough guy, like
charismatic, handsome, cool guy. Yep.
Right.
Everyone loves OJ.
And, she just made him crazy.
Gold digger. We talked about that last time. I mean, honestly, like so many comedians did bits on OJ over the years that were almost entirely along the lines of like, oh, well, she was like taking all this shit and like, wouldn't you be mad too? And it's like, what are you saying? What are you saying? That like,
well, and the other part
ripping
of it,
a person's head off and killing the waiter too is like a legit response to a woman who got some money from you?
Yeah. No, but the other part of it is a lot of it is then put back on the victim, where it's like, well, why didn't you just move or leave, or like, why didn't you just...
She did.
Well, yes, but not out. I mean, in those extreme circumstances, I'm like, okay, well, if I was in that, what would I do? I was like, I'd probably move to frickin' Kansas and not let nobody in my life know where I am, because that seems safer.
Witness protection program style.
But then I was like, great. So I have to change my entire life because this person is crazy and can't control themselves. Like, how fair is that? But it's still, most of the time, they're like, I don't see why she just didn't do that. I was like, because why does she have to change her whole life? Because he's nuts.
Yeah. But like, you're like, well.
But also, I'm like, but I would like to live. So I guess, like, if those are the choices I'm given.
And in that case, she did seem to know that he was ultra violent. And,
yeah.
But yeah, to me, one of the more like striking things about the whole case is when watching the interviews with Marsha Clark all the years later, who was the lead prosecutor, when she gave her opening statement, it was like she had basically was going to tell a story of a woman that was being stalked and killed, and it was going to be a kind of a little bit of a feminist story, but a story that like anyone could understand. Mm-hmm. An innocent woman that encountered an ex-husband that was dead set on hurting her, and how terrifying that is. And she was like, as I'm giving my opening statement, I'm like looking at the jury and I'm watching their eyes, they don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Like they don't care about Nicole at all. And that was like shocking to me. And she's like, and I had to keep doing the opening statement knowing that they weren't buying it. It's almost like a comedian like that's dying on stage and like has to just keep.
Right. You just
keep going.
Keep going into the void sweating. On that one. Like nobody's dropping a laugh.
But to me, that's so crazy because, like, I don't know, when I hear the story of Nicole, I'm like, I'm really sympathetic, but I guess you can't count on that from everybody.
No, you can't. And I think we talked about it before because I think Danielle was here. But a lot of times, even people who've lived through similar circumstances are even harder on the victim and less forgiving in those scenarios because they just think like, well, I got through it, so I don't know what your problem is.
It's fascinating.
And so, yeah, you have all those dynamics. I mean, like, now I'd probably ask a screening question like, do you guys watch the Hallmark movie channel at all? Because it kind of feels like every movie or every other movie
Are you
has.
a Hallmark movie channel?
I'm not, but anytime like it's on around me, I'm like, is this just all this channel is like the weird, like, it's either the super romantic mushy or it's like the crazy, my husband is out to kill me.
I married a murderer.
Yes.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Like that, there's a dissertation there because it's like these dual fantasies.
Just spend a week watching the Hallmark movie channel and see what we come up with.
It's either both of them are about the perfect husband, but one of them is not what he seems to be. Right.
Yes.
But like, they draw on this idea of like, oh, you don't know who you're with. Like that sort of thing. Ugh. Well, I mean, in that sense, like OJ's story is like one of our biggest true crime, like intellectual properties.
Yeah. I was just talking about this actually with my dad at lunch because he's like, yeah, you just have like those moments in your life where everybody knows where they were when something happened. He's like, everybody has like, I knew where I was when I found out 9/11 happened.
Sure.
I was like, yeah, I was in, like, they wheeled out like the old days of like the giant TV carts in schools.
Wait, are you talking about for OJ? Or
yes, for the OJ verdict, they wheeled out into the lobby of our high school. The TV plugged it in so we could all see the verdict happen live. I could just remember. And I remember standing there at the time thinking like, this is so crazy that we have stopped school and we're all watching this thing. But also I'm like, but I need to know. And it's before I could have just had it on my phone and been like, yep, teacher, you keep talking. I'm listening to what's happening.
Right. You would have just seen it on an alert or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I got the O.J. Simpson alert on my phone that's like, he's dead. And I'm like, oh, I didn't have that one for the trial.
No.
We listened to a radio. Like, actually, we had a radio at our school that my teacher, I remember she was very reluctant to have us listen to the O.J. trial. She was like, this isn't news, or she was not into it. Because if you remember, there was a lot. It was there was an angle on it. It was like, what are we all doing here? We're all watching this fucking trial like every day, as if it's like, we're munching popcorn while we're watching it. It's macabre.
Yeah.
And there was a discourse in the culture that like, this is sick. But like either way, we listened to the radio thing. And what's interesting is that like there were a lot of. I went to a school here in Ventura in the 90s, it was racist as hell. Like a lot of like white kids who just had nasty fucking attitudes. And the OJ thing got them. They wanted him to fry. And it was like, and they were so mad when he was not guilty. And what I remember about it is now thinking like they didn't care about Nicole either.
No.
The ones that wanted to fry OJ, they didn't care about Nicole either.
Yes. I was like, I was mad about the verdict, but I was mad about the verdict because I'm like, this woman.
Yeah.
Went through this.
She was only 40 years old.
Yeah.
And Ron Goldman, even less so, was cared about. Like, that guy's just disappeared. Like, he was just collateral damage to the whole thing. But my other memory of that day is going to mock trial practice that night. And Ron Bamier.
I bet there was so much to be said.
And Ron, realizing now he was like 30. Like, and his hair is black. And he said, before we get started tonight, I want to say something about the O.J. Simpson trial. And I remember him just saying that it was like a travesty of justice, basically. And he was really he was very disturbed by the whole thing, honestly. And like, he was trying to tell us that this was part of the TV phenomenon and celebrity culture. And like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember feeling like this guy cares and sees an angle on it that like, other people aren't necessarily.
Well, there were
we'll have
so
to get Ron
many.
Up here.
I know.
What did you say about OJ now? Yeah.
There were so many angles on it because you had the gender angle, you had the race angle, you had the wealth angle. Like you had so many angles of how you could talk about that case and positions you could take based on all of that. So
and the whole history of Los Angeles, the riots had happened like the year before.
Yeah,
like,
it wasn't that
It
long.
was like the Rodney King thing, all of that. That's just like seared in my memory because I was young enough to be impressionable. You know what I mean? Like I was old enough to understand it, but young enough to not really get it.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't think of most of those other components at the time and, not connecting it to the overall racial tensions in LA that were still...
that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Well, do you remember the movie Natural Born Killers? Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Oliver Stone movie. That was part of that whole critique that I feel like I started to understand that part of it more than the racial element of it, the media part of it, and the fact that there was a circus and we were all that tabloid culture
kind of kicked off the 24-hour news cycle.
That's right.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it was that, and then a few years later, the Columbine thing. But those really were the ones that all of a sudden, then it was breaking news all the time. Because before that, it was just intermittent, here and there. But yeah, everybody watching that trial for however long that went on. What was it, a month or something? Or
more than that. The OJ trial?
Oh yeah, no, it was
I think that went on for months, I feel like.
Yeah.
Maybe it didn't. I mean, it was also like DNA. They did DNA evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It was like there was so much in that. It really was weirdly an education, but an odd education.
It's an education through a lot of mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
which, is a way to learn. But on those types of stakes, you don't want it that way.
Oy. Yeah, now I'm thinking of like the Unabomber, the Oklahoma City. The 90s were nuts.
They were the fact that we made it out
I know,
are relatively normal. It's a miracle.
It's weird because you think of like 9/11, it's like, oh, that's when things got crazy, know? But like, I'm like, no. Like,
there were before that.
We were at war. The mass shootings and everything. Now I'm just like thinking about violence. Because that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. It's sort of like, I don't know, there's an atmosphere of violence to relationships, like the end of relationships.
Yeah.
Not always, obviously, but like, I'm just wondering if there are, I don't know, surprising times where you've seen things go one way or another that you feel like you weren't expecting people to act this way, or.
Yeah, we've definitely had that. I mean, so when there's known abuse happening, the most dangerous time for the person who's the victim is when they leave.
Right.
So you know that, and if you're part of it before they leave, you're trying to work with them on like a safety plan, and so that like here's what we can make sure to do to try and protect you, because when he gets served with these papers or when he gets the phone call that there's court, like he's potentially, or she is potentially going to go nuts. You have the other ones where you're not aware going into it, and I mean, we have sent out our investigator to serve somebody with divorce papers, and like people have taken a swing at him because they just weren't expecting it, or we didn't know that there was that level.
You can get served with divorce papers like you're getting subpoenaed, like someone just shows up and just gives them. It's not like. So it's like that's the first time you learn that you're getting divorced?
Potentially. I mean, that's not the way I love to do it, but sometimes there's not enough of a ability to communicate like, hey, we're getting a divorce, like expect some paperwork. Like my preferred method is like, let me just mail it to them. They can sign that they received it. I don't want to send somebody out and they like throw the paper in their face and you're served. That's not what our investigator does, by the way. But
what a letter to get in the mail.
Right.
My God.
Well, if you know it's coming, like, hey, you're going to get this in the mail, expect it. That's great, because sometimes when you're backed into a wall, people do behave in terrible ways. But yeah, like in order to start the lawsuit, you have to serve the person personally, unless they accept it some other way. It's any other lawsuit.
Yeah.
The service requirements are the same. So yeah, we've had some real crazy situations that we were not prepared for.
I'm sure. I mean, one of my best friends, his dad and mom were married for 40 years, and it was a terrible marriage for the entire 40 years. And at some point, the father decided, I'm done. And when the wife went off on like a couple days to go see her sisters or something, he cleaned out everything from the house. This is 40 years of marriage. She had no idea this was coming. He cleaned out everything, all of his shit, and he just basically left a note on the like table that said, I want a divorce. I never want to speak to you again. This is my lawyer's number. You need to deal with them.
Yikes. That is rough.
Right? But then all of them were like, actually, we ripped the Band-Aid off. And like,
yeah.
Have you seen things like that? Or like, what?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. I mean,
so brutal,
people who want their exes served on Valentine's Day or on Christmas or
are you serious?
Their birthday. And you're just like, come on, man. Like
they want to twist the knife.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not necessarily interested in twisting the knife.
An element of revenge with the divorce.
Well, I was like, this is not going to help you at all. It's only going to make things worse. I mean,
you try to talk them out of that?
Yeah. I mean, I won't sit there. If I know
their birthday.
Yeah, if I know it's their birthday, sometimes you don't know it's their birthday because I don't have all of their information. But if I know and they're like, he must be served on this day, I was like, but why? Because I'm uncomfortable with why you might want to do that. I don't have that happen a lot, but I have seen it over the years where you just have that person who's in that moment of vindictiveness, and it may just be a moment, but you kind of have to be there to pull them out and say like, all right, but
I was going to say, is that like a spidey sense where you're kind of like, this person is coming at it from obviously there's emotion always, but like the vindictive revenge element in there is intense.
It
and
is.
Probably as a lawyer, you're like, that's not wise.
No.
Why are you trying to make this worse?
Yeah. That's why I cringe when people ask in like an initial consultation. They're like, well, I need a bulldog because I need to screw them over. And I'm like, oof, I don't know that we're on the same page here.
You don't think of yourself as a bulldog?
I don't. Like, I definitely have that capacity, and I'm always riding like kind of the two rails simultaneously of like, can we settle this, or are we going to need to litigate it? And what do I need for one of those two things to happen? And I'm always preparing for both. And once we're in litigation, what's great, like gloves are off. Not gloves are off. It's not like you're doing anything shady, but it's like, yeah, okay,
I know
great.
what you mean. Yeah.
We're going in, we're advocating your position, and that's it. And I'm done. But like, not let me just poke this person throughout the entire process and be a total pain in their ass. Like that doesn't, that's what it feels like when somebody calls and they're like, I want a bulldog. I want somebody who's just going to like slam them with letters every single day and just pummel them to the ground for every little thing. Like that doesn't,
it seems almost legal, just legally, like kind of almost, it could be reckless.
It feels
right?
a lot
if you're like I want a lawyer to just fuck with them constantly. And you're like, okay, but I mean, to me, we need to be de-escalating in this situation. Why are we escalating?
It feels like using the legal process to continue to control and abuse somebody in a lot of instances.
Totally.
Because if you're the one who can fund it to just jam everything down their throat and they have to keep going to court and keep responding to every little thing.
There are like malicious uses of the legal system, right? Like you think about like Scientology, right? I don't know if you're a Scientologist.
I'm not.
Okay, but they're in town. They're in Ventura. There's like
I know they have that huge building.
center, and like one of the Thai restaurants I go to, like I love this place, but they have like Scientology shit all over the place.
Ooh.
And like, they're free to do whatever they want. Their Thai food is good, so
I was gonna say
I'll keep going
offline. I'll get where that is.
I don't care, but Scientology's like, I read the book about them, Going Clear, I think it was called. That was like just about how vicious their legal strategy is. Like they cultivate lawyers in their religion, and they like have law schools. They want more and more lawyers, and they're very litigious, and they will sue you into poverty if you mess with them at all. And it's like, to me, like you could have that in a family court or family law situation,
right?
The
Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes divorce was a little bit of that. I think that they
Speaking of Scientologists,
right?
Yeah,
I was going to say, I think that they ended up pulling it out of that, probably just for privacy reasons, because he probably didn't want a lot of that information in a court file.
I'm not sure he's seen that, his daughter.
I don't think he has.
Which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's disturbing, actually. But like that element of like using the law like in a vicious, the bulldog thing. But,
right.
Like that's what I think of when I think of, that's why I thought of Scientology, because it's sort of like, part of me is kind of like, that's cool that you can use the law to like bully people, like scare people, but it's also like very powerful.
Yes. Well,
because
that's like what we
and
talked
can be
about.
used obviously for malicious, horrible things.
Right. Well, I think we've talked about that before, like with the use of words. Like, yeah, you can absolutely take somebody out with some well-placed words. Do you need to?
Yeah.
Like, is that the best route forward? Because, and again, in other lawsuits, that's probably what's needed. But usually in family law, you're always trying to balance it a little bit with this is still a family in some way, shape, or form. You know, even if it was just a marriage and no kids, there's still a relationship of some length that you're trying to not. At some point, you presumably loved this person, respected this person. Like if that's where
it's like, I don't remember that
right?
moment, though.
No, they don't. But I was like, if that's where it was at some point, like why would you go so far and be so disrespectful? And
there must be moments where people get back together though, right?
There are. Yeah.
Have you been shocked ever where you're like,
yes,
I can't believe this couple is back together?
Yes. Most of the time you can kind of see you can read between the lines as stuff starts happening, and then all of a sudden you get the like, well, we've been talking and like maybe you're like, oh, okay. But there have been some where it's like we're a month away from like a trial, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, we want to call that off. We're back together. I was like, when were you gonna tell us that? Like,
And it's
we're
like, what
been
happened?
doing
They
stuff
like
here.
got drunk one night, and
Yeah, I don't-
one thing led to another, and now
I don't
like,
necessarily ask a lot of follow-up questions.
Holy
I'm like,
shit.
okay.
I mean, that's crazy, and at the same time, like not unexpected, I guess. When those moments happen, do you feel like like a warm feeling of like love, like the triumph of the triumph of romance?
Well,
Or do
you're
you-
assuming that I have feelings.
Well, okay, but yeah, I guess
I don't think I can reach that level with most of my clients because they don't know enough about their relationship.
So you
as
just
it
have to kind of shake your
existed.
head when it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Or are you kind of like you? Come
I mean,
on.
how much do any of us know about somebody else's relationship anyway?
That's
so
true.
like, you're like, I don't know, maybe this was like your crazy like foreplay for like the really great next 10 years of your life.
Gross. TMI. It feels. I have this in my family. A couple different couples have gotten divorced and then back together, including my grandma and grandpa. My mom's parents. They had a bitter divorce, and then he got sick afterwards and was like, "I need my wife back," and like they got back together and even got married. Like even like did a ceremony and got married, with all their daughters being like, "What the fuck." Like, how are they getting back together after all of that?
Well, I would say sometimes I think the ones that are the most contentious, because there's obviously still some level of feeling there. I'm not going
Right.
to call it love, but like when you go from love to whatever that is.
Look, you're describing feelings.
All
Jen.
right. I know. I can describe them. Doesn't mean I feel them.
Describe them like an anthropologist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Experiencing them from the outside.
I have seen this in the human
In the
species.
wild.
Yes.
But yeah, I think when there's sometimes that level of animosity there's still emotional attachment there versus the ones who are just like, I want to walk away and be done. Like, let's make that as easy as possible.
Right.
Like that level of apathy that you're like, oh, okay, yeah, there's
not something
there's
real
nothing
there.
to resuscitate there.
Yeah. God, that adds like a really fierce angle to it, honestly. It's like the idea of like the couple that's fighting so passionately all the time. You're like, is this like the way they sort of like, love each other? I'll put it that way.
That's their love language, is to
Their
yell.
love language is beating the shit out of each other emotionally for
Yeah.
years and ruining everyone's lives around them.
That could be.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
That's a sweet
See?
thought.
There we go.
Jen, thank you. It's always fun to talk with you.
Thank you.